In Ezekiel 22 verse 30, he said, the Lord was speaking and he said, I sought for a man among them that should make up the hedge and stand in the gap before me for the land, that I should not destroy it. He said, but I found none. For a whole land, God found no man. That is how barren territories are. The fruitfulness of a territory is not the agriculture. The fruitfulness of the territory are not natural resources. The fruitfulness of the territory is the availability of men that God can use for his agenda. And so when God enters a territory and he does not find a man, even if that territory is rich in agriculture and rich in natural resources, as far as heaven is concerned, that territory is barren. And so see what God said. Because he found no man, in verse 31 he said, therefore have I poured out my indignation upon them, and I consumed them with the fire of my wrath. Their own way have I recompensed upon their heads, saith the Lord. So a whole territory was destroyed because no man was found. Maybe there were diamonds there. Maybe there was gold there. Maybe the agricultural productivity of that land was very high, but there was no man. And if God's agenda cannot be expressed, the territory is a desolate territory. And so what brings value to a territory is, first of all, the availability of men. And when we talk about men, we are not talking about people that breathe oxygen. We are talking about people that can connect to the frequency of heaven and find out what God is doing in the now. Because at all times, God is doing something. Can you imagine that God wanted to destroy the earth and waited for 100 years because he wanted Noah to be saved? Noah took 100 years to build the ark and God waited. In those 100 years, they gave birth to men. Marriages took place. Agricultural things were happening. But as far as heaven was concerned, the earth was already doomed. The moment Noah finished and entered the ark with animals that God wanted to carry to the next dispensation, the earth was destroyed. So what makes a generation relevant is not the population, it's the agenda of God. The degree to which they can fulfill the agenda of God is what makes that generation relevant. And so for every generation, God has an agenda. And so whether we will be relevant or not is to the degree that we align with God's agenda. And so the reason God will not stop looking for a man is because people must find his agenda for every dispensation and for every generation. And unfortunately, very few find God's agenda. Very few find God's agenda. A conference like this is put together because a desperate people are crying. And they are saying, Lord, whatever it takes for me to be your man, I will be that person. Let me read another scripture to show you the severity of this matter. In Isaiah chapter 6 from verse 1. Here was a man who had the title of a national prophet. Among men, they were applauding him. And suddenly, he was brought into the courts of heaven because God wanted to reveal certain things to him. The first thing God wanted to show him is the excellency and the splendor, the authority and the power that exists where the government of God is domiciled. And so he said, in the year that King Uzziah died, he said, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne. So he woke up to the fact that there were kings on earth, but there is an eternal king in heaven. The ones on earth die, but the one on the throne in heaven never dies. So God began to show him, first of all, how immortality controls the matters that operate among mortal men. So while your own kings die and new kings are born, he said there is another throne that is eternal. I saw the throne of God, and he said it was high and lifted up, and he said his train filled the temple. He said above it, he now began to see the excellency of God. And the first way God displayed his excellency was to show him some of the creatures that have the right to walk around him. Because if you don't know what it takes to stand in God's presence, when God calls you, you will take it for granted. Because he was on earth calling himself a prophet, because he thinks serving God is about title. He now saw seraphims And he was dazzled by the splendor, the mystery, and the power that these creatures commanded. He said they had 6 wings. With 2 of them, they covered their feet. With 2 of them, they covered their faces. And with 2 of them, they did fly. And he said they were covered with eyes. He spoke of brilliance, intelligence. He spoke of superlative kind of knowledgeability that these creatures that walk with God commanded. And above that, he said these creatures were burning like fire. There is a credential for a creature that will walk around this throne. It's not a place you can just stroll in and stroll out, because he didn't know what it meant to be a prophet. And that's why from Isaiah 1 to Isaiah 6, he had not entered his calling, because his calling was to be a messianic prophet. It was through his voice that a door will be created for Christ to come. He was operating in word of knowledge, talking to nations, but he had not even entered his office because there are credentials. And so when he saw the seraphims, God did not speak. In fact, throughout that vision, God never spoke to him. It was the seraphims that looked at him and said, "How did you come here?" The people who come here have credentials. You don't even have the first. Before you can even stand and look around, you must be purged. So why God was not talking? The beings that were in God's presence, it takes rank to stand with God. When Gabriel met Zacharias, he gave him a word and he doubted him. You say, don't you know me? I am Gabriel. I stand in God's presence. You don't doubt us. If you doubt me, it's an error. But because you have undermined the integrity of my utterance, they say you'll be dumb. So you will not talk again until the day this thing happens. So if it takes 50 years, he will be dumb. Now, God did not tell him to punish Zacharias. He was speaking from his authority level. I am Gabriel. I am Gabriel. People, if God calls you into his service, it's a ranking in Zion. It's a ranking. So serving God is a privilege. I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence. I bring you these glad tidings, and you doubt, you'll be done. And the man thought it was a joke. He came out, he tried to talk. He now discovered even your vocal cord is not a product of biology. There are powers that are at work. You think you are working because you are strong. When grace is withdrawn, you will discover your bone is too heavy for you to carry it. He couldn't talk, and he didn't talk until the day it happened. And so when he saw the seraphims, please sit down, they took the coal from the midst of the fire and touched his tongue and said, "Now your iniquity is purged." God didn't talk. God didn't forgive him. They knew the technology of washing sins away in heaven by fire. Your iniquity has been purged. You can now be a prophet, but we don't know whether God will still send you. Now that is where my heart was broken, because a man was in God's presence and God was asking, "Who shall we send?" You have the title of a national prophet, but God said, "Who shall we send and who shall go for us?" The man had to begin to reapply. "Lord, I am here. Send me. Have I been rejected? I am in your presence. You are looking for who to send." Because when God says, "I'm looking for a man," it's not because he's not seeing people. His credentials, his qualification is asking for. There are credentials men must have in order to be part of God's agenda. And like I said, if God's agenda is not fulfilled, a generation can be wiped off. And it doesn't mean anything in the realm of God. Because the value of a generation is the degree to which they align to God's agenda. But for you to be the man God uses, you must have a qualification. Bible scholars tell us between Malachi and Matthew, or John the Baptist who prophesied, that was written in Matthew, it was 400 years of darkness. God was quiet because he didn't find a man. And so if you go to heaven in God's dealing with man, that region is a vacuum. It doesn't matter if God's population at that time was 500,000, it means nothing. God was quiet because there was no man who could host his agenda and fulfill it. So our number is not what gives us relevance. Our alignment is what gives us relevance. Because if we can't advance God's agenda, our number is useless.